Greetings and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of chalkboardnews.com. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K-12 education. Many school districts across the country have changed their disciplinary policies to what they say is a more equitable system, where minority students aren't facing higher rates of suspensions or other disciplinary action than white students, as has been the case in the past years. But outcomes have been mixed, and in many cases, the changes lead to more disruptions in classrooms. A North Carolina school district, for example, reported a higher crime rate than the previous year after implementing an updated disciplinary policy for which it paid a nonprofit more than $800,000 to help implement it. Joining me to discuss this is Brendan Clary, Chalkboard's K-12 editor. Brendan, tell us more about what's going on in this particular North Carolina school district.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. So this is the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, which is kind of a mouthful, but it's like a school district that actually merged together a few decades ago, I believe. And so basically, this is part of the broader shift toward equitable discipline that, as you mentioned, we have seen taken up in a number of school districts, especially larger school districts across the United States. And so part of that is, as you said, administrators are looking for ways to address what they call, racial disparities in discipline, right? So how do we make sure that, if you have maybe 25% of the population is students of color, then, why are they having, 59% or, 60% of the punishment, for in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, those kinds of things. So you're looking at that and you're saying, why is there sort of this disparate impact for these communities of color? And so I think that, part of that, it's a complicated issue, right? There's a lot of different kinds of, factors that go into that. And I think that there have been some studies that have shown that, maybe, there is some maybe biases going on there, but then you also have teachers pushing back and community members pushing back and saying, well, you're not actually putting down discipline when it's needed, right? So maybe that there are these students who are acting out in class and they would have received a, in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension and been removed from the class. And in an effort to try to not have this disparate impact or make it appear, right, that there's, some inequitable disciplinary policies going on, that those students remain in the classroom, and then that can be disruptive for students. So that is sort of at the heart of this, right, is how do you handle that? Because I think that there are arguments that administrators might make of students need to be in class in order to learn. And if we're removing them from that situation, then they're falling farther behind and they're not being able to get the opportunities they need to learn and do well. So it's sort of punishing them twice. And I think that there are those kinds of arguments there. But on the other side, you have, if you have 30 kids in a classroom and one of them is being very disruptive, then it's extremely harmful to the other 29 kids if that student is allowed back, right? So that's sort of at the heart of this, Dan, I think, is how do you sort of balance, those kinds of things, if like against the one student who's maybe causing some disciplinary issues versus the other students. And then also, how do you sort of disentangle that from maybe some larger societal issues, or, if you're saying that there's bias there, then how do you kind of prove that, right? So that's sort of the issue here. And that's some of the changes that have been made in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools.
Brendan, this seems to me it sort of mirrors what's been going on in the criminal justice system in communities and states across the country in the name of a more equitable criminal justice system. There are prosecutors and just state legislators who have adopted policies such as no cash bail. You can't hold someone in jail in Illinois and California and some other states where they have to pay a bail to get out when they're waiting for their case to process through the criminal justice system. You've seen prosecutors just refuse to prosecute certain crimes like retail theft. And that has resulted in increased levels of those types of crimes in those communities who do it. So it really doesn't surprise me that this very similar policy position in schools is having a similar effect. This Winston-Salem school district in North Carolina, they've seen increased reports of crime in their schools. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. So that's like, something that I wanted to look at the data as compared to last year, right? So this is something that they've been doing for a few years. They've updated their code of conduct. They've paid that nonprofit $800,000, as you mentioned, to revamp that with them and try to crack down on some of this unequitable, as they say, unequitable disciplinary policies, and sort of try to change that. So this was, I believe, the second year of the implementation of that. And that's what we did see, is that there was a higher, per 1,000 student, there was a higher incident rate of crime. And a lot of that crime was drug possession. So, but the overall crime rate per student was higher, much higher than the overall for the state of North Carolina. And there was a rise over the whole state of North Carolina. There was a rise in that. And I don't know if you could try to expand that nationally, but there has been, this might be a broader trend as well. I'm not sure you could draw it out that far, but you can with the state of North Carolina, because we do have those metrics from year over year. And from what I looked at last year, this is higher, but it is higher for the school district in particular, which I think is interesting, because you're looking at that code of conduct and how it's changed. And so a weird thing with there was the school did report more serious assaults to the state, but has since walked that back and is saying that was not completely accurate, that there was some coding of incidents that was wrong. So they're actually trying to fix that with the state, because apparently right now it looks like there is, I believe, 30 serious assaults, which are a really big deal, because I think it's a threat to safety. And so it would be a very, very serious incident. And so that was over-reported. So that's kind of a confusing thing about some of the data there. But I think that would, even if those were not in the serious assault thing, that those would still be in, the crime data. And so that would hold true for the overall crime incident. So that is higher. And I think that's something that, a commentator at a school board meeting last week, he said, essentially, if students were to try this in the real world, they would go to jail, right? So if you were trying to do this kind of thing, this is teaching students that they don't have to be accountable for their actions, right? And so that's something that you mentioned with the cash bail and sort of this kind of thing, is that this is teaching students, you can kind of get away with what you need to at school, and that there are not the consequences that you would maybe face in the real world.
Brendan, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and all stories related to K through 12 education at chalkboardnews.com.
Ran for state office and was beaten. Started a business and failed. Ran for Congress and lost. But thankfully, Abraham Lincoln didn't give up. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.